So here we're going to do, I know you guys got to talk about villains. I think there was one person that didn't get mentioned. So really quick, how many of you remember 90s movies? Do we have any 90s movies fans? Yeah, there we go. All right, so here we go. Anybody remember this villain right here? Anybody remember this? I hate her. Wow, that escalated quickly. I did not expect that. And that's currently one of the highlights of my day. That was amazing. Yeah, so to be really clear, I've never seen this movie, but my wife has. And we were talking about this because I'm a guy. That's why I hadn't seen this movie. I don't know. No, I was laughing though. We were talking about it the other night. And so is this Regina? Is this her name, Regina? Yeah, is this? Wow. Did she hurt you? Like, did she hurt you? I don't know. No, it's fun. Like, you know why this is such a visceral response? You know, I love this. This is so perfect. What's great about this is because most of you, how many of you knew a Regina in high school? Did anybody know a Regina in high school? All right, now here's a harder question to answer out loud. How many of you were Regina in high school? Don't lie. Go ahead, be honest. It's true. You can't lie. They're like, I don't know, maybe. Yeah. It's funny because when you look at this, you know, we think about cancel culture, we think about things that are happening in our world. If you're on Twitter, like this kind of stuff, you see this all the time. And celebrities getting canceled, organizations getting canceled, people getting canceled, pastors getting canceled, all this kind of stuff. And there's all sorts of stuff going on. But it's almost like we act like this started when we became adults, but this isn't the case at all, right? This isn't the case at all. You grew up in some version of cancel culture at a kickball game, right? Or you grew up in some version of this where somebody along the way did something that ostracized them, and all of a sudden they got pushed out just a little bit. And I'll say this too, at least in my high school and middle school, oftentimes this disproportionately happened to girls or women in our high school, which is always interesting. You would see guys and girls do the exact same thing, and oftentimes it was the girls who got the label, it was the girls who got this kind of things. And it was so fascinating around this. Now, I'll tell you, I saw this a lot growing up, but I don't think we didn't really label it, right? We might have said bullying or those kinds of things, which we still talk about. But we really didn't have a great label for it. Now, the part that we're going to talk about today, and I'll tell you where we're going to go through this series is, I'm going to frustrate about half the room today with most of my message, which I'm excited about. And then next week, I'm going to frustrate the other half of you. So you don't have to, if you like today, don't come back next week. I'm just kidding. You should come back both weeks. So we'll do that. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about both things. But I'm going to say this as a caveat right off the bat. Depending on your experience so far, some of you have been the person who has been bullied and have been hurt, and you have very clear pain around what we're going to talk about. And there's a part of you, and you know this, there's a part of you that we use the word justice a lot, which we will talk about a lot next week. We use the word justice a lot, but in the name of justice and in our desire for justice, oftentimes we do things to people or we take a posture towards people that is almost identical, just in a different way to what's been done to us, right? And so if that's you, I'll tell you that you're gonna hear what we say through that lens. I think one of the best things that you can do, and this is part of my story too, is to recognize what lens you're hearing it through. And some of you've never experienced that kind of thing before, and you're not Regina, you're not Regina. We know you're not Regina, but a little bit, there's a piece of you that might have a disproportionate power dynamic in a way where you have not experienced certain things. And it had nothing to do with what you grew up in or things that you controlled. It was things that maybe were just a part of your life. And you hear stories and you don't have context for it. And so I will say this, what I'm going to ask you to do, if there's a part of you that goes, I don't fully understand that, I'm going to ask you at least for the next, I don't know, I usually talk for 30 to 95 minutes, somewhere in that range. I'm kidding. We did that last week. We're good. It's going to be 15 minutes, I promise. I'm going to ask you to do this. I'm going to ask you at least to suspend disbelief, almost like you would in a movie, and just assume that something that somebody else might have said along the way might be true, or that you've experienced something, and try to see it from somebody else's perspective. Because the thing that's true of all of us, where no matter how you see cancel culture, what your immediate response to this is, or Regina, is that there's a piece of us, and when we see somebody fail spectacularly or in a big way, or we see somebody do something that we certainly disagree with, or that's hurtful to us or hurtful to other people, or collectively hurtful to society, there's a piece of us deep down, we don't say it out loud because we're smarter than this, but we kind of think this. We just kind of say, I would never do that, right? I would never do that, right? I think this, all the time, which it speaks to me, but I would never do that. I would never do that to my friends. I would never do that to my spouse. I would never steal money that way. I would never do those kinds of things. I would never hurt somebody in that way. I would be more careful in my friendships and my relationships, not to throw words around in the ways that I do it. I would never hurt my kids because I'm a better parent. Even when I feel like I'm not a good parent, there's always another parent that I feel like I'm better than. No, that's just me. Okay, y'all are much better people than me. I don't know. But I'm good at this. And I go, I would never. I remember thinking this. I grew up in a louder household, and then Emily grew up one of 5 kids, so we're loud. Our house is loud. And I'll never forget saying, I was like, I will never yell at my kids. And then 3 a.m. rolls around, and my son kicked me in a place that elicits a noise. And and I remember thinking, I yelled, and I didn't just yell, I yelled for real. Like I yelled. Yeah, and I remember thinking, yeah, like I would never do that. And I absolutely did that. You know what I mean? There's a piece of this where we think this all the time, and in big moments, we think this. In small things, we think this. But the truth of the matter is that you and I are only a handful of decisions away from doing anything that anybody has ever been canceled for doing. You're just a few decisions away from that. And the other part about this that's true, and this is the sombering part of this, those decisions were often made by very smart people. And it's not a knowledge game. And those decisions were made by people who experienced things in their life. And you go this, I would never do that. But at the same time, the thing that's in them is also in you. And it might be look different, it might shape different, it might be a different thing for you, but that thing in us that's willing to do things that are harmful to other people, it just exists in us. Now, you don't need a definition, but just so that we're all on the same page, I'm gonna give you this definition real quick of cancel culture. And that's this: the movement of stripping someone of their credibility and a reputation while publicly humiliating them. Now, there's 1,000 definitions of this, and this is a really, really great definition that I got from Urban Dictionary, so it's great. If you know, you know. So here's the thing. Now, you know this about cancel culture, though, and you've seen it. Publicly, we look at somebody and we point, and then a lot of people come around that thing. There are people that organize around this, and it just happens. And we feel a little bit immune to it. And here's why I feel immune to it, because I'm not famous, right? I feel a little bit immune to it because I've got, 1,500 followers or so on Twitter, and 1,300 of them are my mom, I'm sure. Like, she just made a bunch of accounts, like you're immune to it. And here's what happens to a lot of us when we do that. When I see something that happens, and especially when I'm behind a screen, there's a piece of me that feels like that I'm anonymous enough to take a swing at somebody who can never swing back, right? And that's a posture thing. I can be angry, but it's hard to be angry with somebody in person and do or say some of the things that we say digitally. And so what happens, especially in the digital world, this just kind of bombards and grows, becomes a thing. Now, if you have a high school student or a middle school student, you know this. This isn't just celebrities. This happens with students all the time. Now, I grew up with AOL.com. You remember this, where there's dial-up? Some of you Ava has no idea what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? Like you get this, like you get, like, I grew up in an AOL Instant Messenger. Do you remember those days? Right? Pac-Man 1356, bam, and I remember this, though. I remember the first time I felt on a screen that I could do something on a screen that I wouldn't have done in person. That was ask out a girl. You know what I mean? Like, will you go out with me? Where are we going? I don't drive, but there's a little bit of that, and there's a different boldness. A different way of thinking and talking that it just feels like it's a part of me. Now, here's the thing that I'd like us all to get on the same page on, and then we're going to spend some time talking about this. The truth of the matter, however you view cancel culture or what people have done, or wherever you tend to bend posture-wise when things happen, the truth of the matter is this: I am capable of shaming other people while comparing others' worst moment to my best. All right, I am capable of shaming other people while comparing their worst moment to my best moment. And you know what's also true? And you don't say this out loud. You're also capable of doing this in your marriage. You're also capable of doing this in your friendships. You're also capable of doing this when it comes to the ways that you lead people. We are capable of this over and over and over again. And oftentimes, when people hurt us, when people do things that we disagree with, when people shame us, or when people do things that are absolutely wrong, right? Those kinds of things. When those things happen, our default posture, especially in the cultural dynamics that we experience now, our default posture around these things is anger and frustration and almost like being battle ready. You know what I mean? And I'll tell you what battle ready looks like. You ready? It's not just like, it's not an armor thing. It's that you've got gotcha statements that you're ready with, that nobody can respond to. We do this in marriage all the time. You know the gotcha statements in your marriage, right? Like, all you got to do is press that one button and she's going to lose her mind, or he's going to lose his mind. And this is the nuclear option in the fight. But you're battle ready, and you're battle ready online with people that you've never met and will likely never ever meet. right? You're battle ready. we find ourselves hostile, contentious, and then this is the fun, like deep theological word. Can I give you this? This is going to bother me all day, and then I'm going to get text messages. You might hold my phone. You can live tweet the whole sermon. That'd be great. That was 100% a joke. Don't do that. Thanks, man. Sorry. I keep sitting on it, and I'm going to think about that the whole time. The last word is this, and this is probably I think the best word for it, is we often just get mean in the name of justice. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, and we're going to talk about justice, and we're going to talk hard about justice next week. But we get mean in the name of justice. And we take on something of ourselves to make sure that we are distributors of the justice. And we often do this in an angry and mean way. And what's interesting about social media that's given us the confidence to do this in a little bit of a different way is now everybody has a microphone. Everybody has a little bit of an audience. Everybody has somebody who will like a post or love a post, or be angry at a post, or argue with you online, and this is what's interesting, and then it also permeates into our culture. Here's how it permeates into our culture. Collectively, this posture finds its way into our human, like interface kind of reaction stuff. I don't know, interface, but you get it, yeah. Like in-person kind of stuff. And it's subtle, and oftentimes it's sarcastic, and it's the best parts that are funny about The Office and also the worst parts that are funny about The Office. You get this? It's that thing that allows us to look out and slightly feel better than someone else because of the actions that they've taken. And then, and then work in some form or fashion to distance them from the community in some ways to be canceled, right? That's my intro. We're 5 minutes in. We're almost done, I promise, right? And this is where we're going to start. And what I'm going to say over the next few minutes, like I said, for some of you, will be wildly frustrating. But what has happened in Christianity, I think, is that a lot of people have taken sides on this. You are either a justice person or a grace person. You're a person who just glosses over things, or you're a person who wants to just tear down everything. You know what I mean? And oftentimes there's a false dichotomy that exists. But the basis of the foundation of what Jesus teaches around this is not unclear. It's not difficult to understand. And it's also one of the hardest parts about being a follower of Jesus. In fact, if you're not a follower of Jesus, just to be fully transparent, 2023, you ready? This is a great reason not to be a follower of Jesus because it doesn't feel great. It doesn't. It removes things from even our way of doing things in life that feel completely off, right? And so in a world of cancel culture, I'm going to tell you what we're going to talk about today is Christianity in a lot of ways was designed as a movement to be counter culture, right? To move against the grain of what culture often is and moving towards, especially when it comes to shame and anger and these kinds of things. Now, what we're going to do today is we're going to look at a passage of scripture, and it's one of my favorites. We hit it probably once every 2 years or so. Now, to give you a little bit of a caveat around this, if you read through your Bible, right, if you're going to pull out your Bible right now, you'd see like almost like pieces of this in parentheses, and this narrative wasn't found in some of the early manuscripts. It was found in other early manuscripts. So there's all this fun debate around this particular story, around Jesus, his interaction with this woman and these religious leaders. But in the midst of it, what we do find is in a lot of the context and extra biblical sort of sources, it finds its way in there too. And so you see this, which we really do believe happened, and it happened in this way, if not more, the details that we have here. But as you read through this, you're going to get the posture of Jesus, and then you're going to get the posture of the people around Jesus interacting in a way where somebody canceled is a tough word, but similarly canceled in that way and pushed aside for something that they did. Now, I should tell you real quick, sorry, if you have really, really young kids, what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes is probably not for, I don't know, my 7-year-old isn't in here, but he's 6, so that's also good. But anyway. Anyway, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at this story, but just to give you a context, if you have young kids, this is where we're going for the next few minutes. Now, in John chapter 8, we're going to pull this up real quick. This is Jesus. What has happened is he's been doing all these miraculous things. He's known as a rabbi, a relatively famous rabbi at this point along the way, and he's frustrated a lot of religious leaders. And so this is what has happened. I don't know if you've ever had a conversation where somebody came in and they were looking for the gotcha statement, that kind of thing. They were looking for that, and they're trying to catch Jesus in like a no-win situation. And so what happens is at dawn, he appears again in the temple courts where all the people gather around him, and he sits down to teach. So there's all these people. He sits down to teach, and I want you to, oh, thank you so much. Thank you. That's great. One day I'm going to have a voice again. It's going to happen. My ENT told me that this week. It's great. All right, so here's what they said. He's sitting down. There's all these people around, and then the religious leaders come to him, right? These religious leaders come to him, and they're in front of all these people are really working in a passionate way to shame somebody. And so he's in these temple courts. As much as you can picture this, he's teaching as a rabbi, almost sitting down, teaching these things, all these people around him. And it says this: the teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery, right? So this is a fascinating statement in the New Testament. This is one of my favorite. Like, it's just so interesting, the nuances of this. Because there's a couple of things around this. It's not really easy for a group of men to walk in on somebody committing adultery. Usually that happens in private, not in the temple courts, right? So there's a couple things around this. The other part about this that's interesting is in the context of this, Jesus is teaching as a rabbi, and they're pulling this woman to him in a lot of ways to both cancel her, but really more specifically trying to cancel him. The other part about this that's interesting is when they go through this process, there's all these like minor discrepancies in how they're approaching it, right? So the Pharisees would have been essentially like scribes, they knowledgeable of the law, these teachers of the law, similar to what Jesus was doing, but also very different. So they bring out this woman. Here's what it says next. It says, they made her stand before the entire group. So again, a group of men forcing this woman who's been caught in adultery to stand before this entire group. And then they say this, they explain what happened. They said, teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. And the law of Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say? Now, when I was brought up with this story, this was kind of like they left out the part around, this is not actually what the text teaches or what the law says. And so they bring this woman out, this group of men, to put her in front of Jesus, and they said the law says that she should be stoned, which would have been a part of the law, but the other nuances of this is they're in a Roman culture. So the other part of this is the Jesus no-win situation is Jesus could say, yes, uphold the law, but then it goes against all of the Roman law that's a part of this, which he's not going to do, or would they do? So they know that he could say yes and affirm this, and then all of Rome is going to come down on him in that way. Or on the flip side of this, he could say, no, she shouldn't be, and then it seems like he doesn't take scripture seriously, right? And so you have this rabbi who's caught in this way of upending or frustrating the cultural norms of how they would not stone somebody for this in this way. And then you have him going, but do you actually take the scriptures and the teachings seriously? But what they didn't talk about was that if a woman was caught in adultery in this way, it wasn't just the woman that was to be brought before Jesus. It was to be the woman and the man to be brought before somebody and then to be stoned. Let me show you this. Looks like this is Leviticus. If you've never read Leviticus, it is a fascinating before you go to bed at night with your kids read. If a man commits adultery with another man's wife, with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress are to be put to death, right? Now, agree with that, don't agree with that. Yeah, certainly, I don't agree with that. But let me say this, right? When it comes to this sort of thing, you're missing the part, right? Or they're missing the part by just bringing the woman, right? Which brings so much question to how this came about in general, right? Did the man run away? They caught them. Where did he go? Like, is he just not there? Why do they prioritize the woman? All these things. There's another verse that talks about the same sort of law in Deuteronomy. Here's what it says. It says, if the man is found sleeping with another man's wife, both the man who slept with her and the woman must die. You must purge the evil from all of Israel. These are the laws that they're pulling from. This is what they're trying to catch Jesus in. And Jesus is you can imagine this. You're like, you left a part out. Where's he at? You know? Where's he at? If it were me, I'd be like, was it one of you? You know what I mean? Like, I want to know. Like, are you here? You know? And so John talks about this. John says this, right? Within this context, he said they were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing Jesus. They're going after Jesus, not just the woman. And so what Jesus says next, and some of you know this narrative, what Jesus says next is so beautiful and powerful because he doesn't directly address them with their question, right? He goes on, it says, but Jesus bent down and he started to write on the ground with his finger. Now, you read the Bible. If you read the Bible, you probably read it quick. it's hard to stop and think about. Can you imagine all these people around with him teaching? They bring this woman, they call her out in front of everybody, and they look at Jesus in this trap and try to force him to say one thing or the other. And all he does is bend down and start writing in the sand or the dirt with his finger. Now, we have no idea what he says. But I think it'd be so much fun if he just says, like, takes one to know one. I'm just kidding. I totally stole that joke from somebody else. There's another pastor who said that, yeah. But, there's that. I mean, what is he writing? There's all this debate. I mean, for thousands of people debating this. Maybe he's writing part of the Roman law in this moment. Some scholars think that he's pulling from an area of Jeremiah that would outline this even further. But whatever he's doing, it's working. And the sense that we get next is they just continue to get frustrated with him, which is so fascinating. It says that they continued to question him. When they kept questioning him, he straightened up. Now, I don't want you to miss this. When they continued to question him, he straightens up. So he goes down the sand, draws a line, writing whatever he's writing. Now, don't miss this. And have you ever had somebody who just nagged you and nagged you and nagged you, and they just wouldn't stop? And you're trying to ignore them. Some of you are sitting next to them right now. We won't talk about that. And they won't let you go. And he straightens up almost from a posture of like power and strength. And some of you know exactly what he says next, right? He says, let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. He doesn't acknowledge is it this or should we do this? No. He said, let any one of you who is without sin cast that first stone. Now, I was brought up to go, so therefore, you never throw a stone. You're 100% passive. You don't get excited about it. You're not for justice. You're just, it's not yours to figure out, right? Revenge is only God's. Let him do his thing, And then I was always like, but what do judges do? Like, why do we have lawyers then? What are the laws for? Sorry, but lawyers in the room. Why are you here if that's it? Like, I don't get it. You know what I mean? That's what I was brought in. I brought up in this like very super path, and that is not at all what this is. Jesus, now this is what's unsettling. Jesus doesn't negate the law, though his other teaching, I think, would around this. What he does is he forces the accusers to look inward before they go outward, and to judge themselves from the lens that they are judging other people. Now, I want you to picture, again, bring this woman in, all these people, Jesus is there, right in the sand, stands up because he's probably frustrated. Any one of you, without sin, throw that first stone. And then you know what he does next? It's so good. And then he stooped down and he starts writing on the ground again. Now, I think this is such a great move. In fact, if I were one of the disciples, this is me. This is what I'm doing in that moment. As soon as he stoops back down, man, I'm like, what y'all want? Like, bring it. That's my rabbi, I've never done that in my life, and I'll never do it again. He starts writing on the ground again. Now, the image that happens next, I don't want you to miss this, is so beautiful and powerful. And it's almost poetic. It's almost poetic how it happens next. It says, at this, those who heard begin to go away one at a time, but don't miss this. And the older ones went first. The older ones went first until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Now, please don't miss it. I think it's so powerful. And I don't know exactly why the older ones left first, but I can tell you why I think. Because there's something, and you know this, there's something about the youthfulness that we have and a little bit of the arrogance, or certainly that I have, anybody who's younger, a little bit of the trying to find a center of our lives, But there's something about like older wisdom, right? You know this. You sit with people in their 80s or something like that, where they just get it sometimes. And I love this. Because they both, in some ways, I think, led by example and put down the rocks because they knew that if you were going to ask me to look inward, I know what's in there. There's a little bit less pretense with somebody in their 80s. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about? Like you're sitting there, there's just a little bit less like proving. There's a little bit less trying. There's a little bit less posturing. There's a little bit less like, am I influential? There's a little bit less like I got to have it all. There's a little bit less like I got to grab. There's just a little bit less of that. And so the older ones, I imagine, throw down their stone, begin to walk away until only Jesus was left with the woman standing there. Now, what's so fascinating in this moment, and the people that were trying to catch Jesus through shaming this woman, is this. Those who came to shame Jesus, they leave in shame. And the shame that they leave in, and don't miss this, was this shame, not even like this like identity kind of shame, but it was a shameful act that they committed to use this woman to trap Jesus in this way. Right? Now, here's why this matters. And again, you're likely not bringing someone who's, been committed adultery in front of people and, doing this to Jesus. You're not. It feels distant in some way. But when you look at this passage, the posture of the people who brought the woman, that same thing is in me. That same thing to feel a little bit better than. That same thing to desire to get the gotcha moments in the trap. That same thing. Now, come on. Nobody says this out loud. And we hide, often we'll hide behind the word justice when we do this. But our desire for justice oftentimes gives us an excuse to take joy in the pain and fall of other people. And you can hear it in somebody's tone. You can read it in the message. Here's one of my favorite things to do. There's a group of people online that'll do this, and especially in the church world. And they'll write headlines and articles about it. And then the headlines will go up, and you're going, that sounds good. Like, that's not a bad thing. Like, call them out. That's good. Yes, and that should, and we'll talk about it again. We will talk about that. But then you read the responses in the comments section. You ever done this? Of course you haven't, because you're not a geek like I am who keeps up with church culture on Twitter, right? But the joy that they take in the comments section is actually illuminating to what is happening around the heart. Come on. When someone else falls, it should grieve you. Now, it doesn't mean that it won't anger you. And it doesn't mean that you don't stand up and certainly pursue justice in those ways. But it should also grieve you. And the other part about this, and you know this too, when it comes to someone who wrongs you, at some point along the way, the healthiest version of followers of Jesus might begin with anger and a desire for revenge, but it does not end there. It progresses. This is what the transformational work of Jesus does to a desire for forgiveness for those people. This is one of the things that's really hard to do. And it's really hard, it's disqualifying, I think, when you take Christianity seriously for a lot of people, is you don't get the choice to forgive. Jesus didn't go, and if you want to, or maybe you should, or your life will just be a little bit better. No. You forgive because you've been forgiven. Right? I put in my notes to say it this way. That my response to past forgiveness should propel my heart towards present and future forgiveness of others. Now, the truth of this is some of you sit here in the midst of a season where you're just angry and you're going, somebody really wronged you. And it might have been yesterday or it might have been 20 years ago. And you're still in a space where you're in that anger section. Yes, that's not wrong or bad. And at the end of the day, though, what Jesus calls us to on your behalf is grace, love, forgiveness, and this pursuit in that direction. And even in the things that feel impossible to forgive. This is one of those things where we could talk about all day. Do we believe that Jesus does supernatural things? And we could talk about healing, we could talk about all these kinds of things. One of the most supernatural things that Jesus does is empower people to forgive people who don't deserve forgiveness. Why? Because forgiven people forgive. Forgiven people forgive. If you've been forgiven, if Jesus has come, taken on the fullness of the weight of all of your sin for all of your life and offered you grace and redemption in that way, forgiven people forgive. But the harder step to this, and this is the part that nobody likes to talk about, including me, and I'd say I don't feel this all the time either. This is hard, it's really hard. And then redeemed people desire the redemption of other people, which means that as long as you take joy in their fall, it is very, very, very difficult for you to desire the redemption of that individual and the restoration of a person. But come on, until these two things are happening, you ready? You are in chains. You are held and you are bound by whatever the lack of forgiveness is, or the transformational work of Jesus in your heart to want redemption in all of the world, not just in the broken parts of the world that you don't really feel connected to. Come on. Yeah, we'll do. Some of you get real passionate, which I love, about redemption on the other side of the world, but you haven't forgiven your spouse yet for something. And you should do both, but that is a lot easier to do just that. You sit next to somebody who hurt you last week and you hold on to it, come on, that's hard. It's hard to forgive and want the redemption of that person and hope and desire that God works in their life. You know what's hard to pray for? Not people who are just in need. It's people who have hurt you and your family. The person who talked about your kid, well, that's hard. I had a betrayal. So I had a relationship years ago where a close friend deeply betrayed our family. You know what I mean? Like deeply betrayed our family. And it took me years, not just forgive, but to pray in a way where I actually wanted them to experience the goodness of life and the fullness of life. And I'd sit there, come on, you're a better person than me. We've already established it. You ever sat there on Facebook and watched and something happens, you're like, oh, that sucks. You know what I mean? Like a little bit, right? It took me a year. But the transformational work of Jesus, the supernatural, life-transforming work of Jesus does something to our hearts in that way. So at the end of this narrative, I'll show you this, we're gonna wrap up in a second, but it's Jesus standing with this woman. Here's what he says. He straightens up. He comes back out of the dirt after writing whatever book he's writing in the dirt, and he says this, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" Now this is what's so fascinating, and it's such a beautiful picture of what Jesus does. Jesus removes the teeth of some of that condemnation. And it's the grace of that moment that sends her away. So your spouse says, no one has condemned me, sir, no one. And he says this, "Then neither do I condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin." Now, this last part's hard for me because I know that there are things that I sin still every day. And I just go and leave your life of sin. It feels like a hard thing to swallow a little bit. But I love that the redemptive work of Jesus and the supernatural work of Jesus here is to go, this happened, you are not condemned, and from that grace go live. Now the truth of the matter is those things can happen with God and those things can happen with Jesus, but oftentimes with other people it can take a whole lot longer time. And so some of you, you have done things, and if we were really honest, you know that you have done things to people. And you've asked forgiveness, and you've asked forgiveness this way and this way, and you expect them to go mutually at the same time. But you also know that doesn't work that way. What Jesus promises is the redemption of this through your heart, the no condemnation through his grace, and then you living from that life of grace as everything around you might take time to heal. But I'll tell you this, and this is where I spend most of my time and where we'll spend our time. But for the person who is hurt, or the person who feels the weight of some of those things, the posture that you come to these moments with and the pain with really is going to shape not just the trajectory of you, the other person, relationships, those things. It sets the trajectory of your heart towards bitterness. It shapes the trajectory of your heart towards the kinds of struggles that you're going to hold on to. And no one is naive enough to go, you just blink and then it's done, because it's not. It's never like that. It's rarely like that. But deciding what you're going to do when it comes to the posture of your heart will shape the trajectory of your life. It really will. So I put in my notes to say this way. The posture of the person who is redeemed should desire the redemption of other people. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I thought a lot about how to wrap this up, because right now it just feels like a good, feel-good message. And let's just hug and leave. Or is that just me? Okay, good. Yeah. I want to acknowledge how hard this is, and I want to tell you what at least I'm trying to work on to do it, right? So truthfully, if I were to tell you, I give you a list of people that I struggle with sometimes, or I could give you a list of an organization that I struggle with sometimes. I give you those kinds of things. And it's things that you work towards, and it's things that you're working through. But this is what I believe that helps at least move us along in that journey. The first thing is this. You have to acknowledge that proximity matters. Proximity really does matter. I mentioned this online, and I think this is part of the online thing, is when I'm not human to human with people, then it is a different thing. When you are in proximity to somebody who's different than you, who sees the world differently than you, those kinds of things, it just does something. I put in my notes this way. It's hard to hate somebody with whom you have close proximity. It is very difficult to do that. There's something about people the closeness of that just erodes certain things. Now, to also say, there are certain people that are not safe. And there are certain situations that are not safe. There are certain things that happen in people's life. It's like, no, there should be distance and that sort of thing, absolutely. But for a lot of things that we carry when it comes to forgiveness, proximity matters. For a lot of the shots and the swings that we take at people online, proximity matters. Come on, let's talk about it. You can be really, really pissed at politicians. Great, but your swing on Twitter on that, come on. It's what? You know what I mean? That uncle, come on, that you really aren't in proximity with, that you just, like, come on, like, that, there's no proximity there. They are not humans in your brain. They are distant objects that you're fighting with, and that's different. So I'll tell you this, in a relationship that needs restoration, that is a safe relationship that you could re-enter, right? Proximity to those people matter. The second thing is this. This is the one that a lot of people disagree with me on, and I totally understand it. But I think you have to predetermine kindness, right? Oh, thank you. Oh, drugs. Is that what that is? No, I was kidding. Oh, cough drops are great. That's great. Yeah, we're on the same boat right now, so I'm with you. Yeah. Predetermined kindness. Now, I'll say this. I was reading a slideshow by a guy named Ian Simpkins, who's fantastic. He's a great follow online. Some of this I saw from him, but I thought it was so good. I wanted to share it with you. He talks about kindness, and kindness is hard. Kindness is hard, especially when there's not close proximity to people. But he said it this way. He said that agreement is not a prerequisite for kindness, and this is really important, right? I can disagree. I can be frustrated. I can feel every emotion and choose kindness with another person. I can choose silence with another person, right? I can choose those things. Kindness is not agreement is not a prerequisite for kindness. The other one is this, and this one's hard, especially for those of you who are followers of Jesus. It's hard to say out loud. One of those things that's difficult as a follower of Jesus. Kindness is not weakness. It is a fruit of the Spirit. It's not love, joy, peace, patience, anger. Like, it's not that. It's just not. It's love, joy, peace, patience. There's a piece of this where the kindness really matters, right? I love this quote by Samuel Johnson. You see this? He says it this way. Kindness is in our power even when fondness is not. That might be amen. You know what I mean? Like, that's the best thing I'll probably say all day. Like, kindness is in your power even when fondness to another person is not. And I'll tell you the third thing, and this progressively get harder, and then we'll just pray and be done. There we go. The third thing is this. I think we have to work to see as Jesus sees, see people as Jesus sees, and then desire what Jesus desires for other people. You know, transparently, this sounds really good. Like, it sounds like the most Christian pastoral thing you say. And the hard part about Christianity done well, right, lived, is that these kinds of things are actually extremely gritty. And they're not easy. And they're painful and they're hard. To see someone who has hurt you as God sees them and desire for that person what God desires for them is very hard. So I'll tell you real quick. A few years ago, I was with a friend, and I think he's probably in his early 70s now. Incredible story. I mean, just one of those very brilliant, wise kind of dudes. And we were hanging out one night on like a staff retreat, and I knew a little bit of his story. I didn't know a lot of their story, but they had 3 kids and then a 4th kid. And I didn't know much about their 4th son, but he had pretty severe disabilities, and he lived probably early 20s, and then he passed away. And so we never really talked about it. He never really opened up about it. And I'll never forget, as we were talking one day, just late one night, a couple of Cokes in him, you know what I mean? And just kidding. And we're sitting there and we're having this conversation, and he tells me a story about his son when he was in middle school. And we had just, I think we had Henry was maybe 1.5 years, 2 years old. And his son got off the bus and was in a wheelchair. And a bunch of the guys on the bus started yelling out and throwing things at him as he's getting off the bus. And I'm listening to him tell the story, and every part of me, I'm an Enneagram 8, so like immediately the justice part of me is like, let's just go down. Where are they now? They're in their mid-40s? Me and you could take them. You know what I mean? Like, let's do it. Let's do it right now. Like, everything in me is angry. My immediate response is, let's just go, Miyagi something. Like, I'm ready, you know? And he could see me visibly getting angry. And he's telling me this story, and the way that the route worked is it was like a state route kind of thing. So it's like their house was on the road. And so he's seeing it happen from his porch. And he's a little bit Clint Eastwood. You know what I'm talking about? Like, he's just enough. And so I popped off that porch, and I went out there, and he said things. I was like, to middle schoolers. I've not even heard that word. That's great. Yeah. And I'm just went angry, scared them. Yeah. And got his son, and they came in the house. And his wife was there. And I'll never forget, as he's telling me the story, he goes, calm down. Later that night, they talked. And his wife said, which would be really hard to hear after that day, that one of the most powerful things that Jesus is going to do in you is help you to see those boys the way that Jesus sees them. And he goes, so I got angry with her after that. And then I'm like, all mad at her, you know? I'm like, and I'll never forget as he told me this. He told me, he said, I would think about how angry I was at them, their families. And it didn't just happen once. And I went and talked to the parent. They did every step that you should do as a parent, you know. And he goes, there were times it would get better and times that it wouldn't. And he goes, and then there was a moment that I realized that some of the things that I was carrying, it had nothing to do with them. And he said, I had to decide and determine how I was going to view them. And I honest to God, I didn't get it. I sat there, I was like, I don't know that I see that. And he looked at me, and this is, it was, mentor-ish kind of moment. He looks at me, he's like, and he goes, at some point along the way, there will be people in your life that they may never change. And they may do horrible things and may deserve everything that they're going to get. And I know this sounds, but you following Jesus, that should grieve your heart at some level. That you should desire the redemption of those people too. And forgiveness of those people too. And so here's what I would tell you. We're going to talk about justice. We're going to talk about accountability. We are. The reason that we started here is that for those people who are followers of Jesus, unfortunately, we weren't given an out to be the kind of people who take pleasure in it. We weren't given an out to hold on to unforgiveness in that way. You weren't given an out to not want the redemption of the whole world and the brokenness of it. And you weren't given an out to say that God should heal some things and not all things. He has called us to something that is countercultural. He's called us to something that is very difficult and hard. He's called us to something that requires something of you. And he's called you to trust him in the process of healing and redemption. As I'll tell you, the prayer that guy gave me that night, that I didn't really know what to do with, but it's so powerful. He said this: Jesus, let me see them the way that you see them, and let me desire for them where you desire for them. Now, let's just be really honest. Did you see that? And you think about it, the very next thought, at least for me, is, but what about? And then there's a list of those people, am I right? But what about? And then the answer to that is, well, yes, especially those people, right? Yeah, absolutely those people. Yes, especially those people. Especially those people. Jesus, let me see them the way that you see them. And let me desire for them what you desire for them. Now, here's where we're going to wrap up. I'm going to pray for us in a second. It's going to feel like we didn't put a bow on it because we haven't, because this is a 3-week series on this. You can't cover all that in 96 minutes. So here's what we're going to do. I want you to internally look in your heart just for a second, right? So there's not going to be any music or anything like that, but I'd love for you, if you would, just for a second, to close your eyes, for a second, bow your head. We're going to do this over the course of the next 3 weeks. But for some of you in the room, just being really honest with yourself, if you are a person who recognizes that you tend to bend towards taking a little bit of pleasure in the fall of other people, especially people who have hurt you, hurt your family, hurt other people, I don't want you to do anything with it. I just want you to acknowledge that it exists, right? If there's a little bit of you that gets on Facebook just to doom scroll, acknowledge that it exists. If there's a little bit of you that has unforgiveness with people, and that deep down, you really don't want the redemption for them. Acknowledge that. And then some of you in the room, if you're really honest, deep down, some of you feel shame in the room because of how much grace you feel like you've been given and how taken advantage of you felt, right? And I've been there too. And if that's you, I want you to acknowledge that. Sometimes I don't feel like there's enough teeth to what I think or say. And sometimes I don't feel like I should pursue justice more or accountability in the world. All I do is feel like I just give grace. I feel like I get trampled on. Acknowledge that as well, whatever that is. And then if you're willing to, and I'm going to pray for you in just a second. I'm going to ask you to pray a very simple prayer. And this is going to be what kind of moves us through this series. And that's this. Jesus, in your head, I want you to say this. Jesus, help me to see others the way that you do. And help me to predetermine that I'll do hard things. Jesus, help me to see others the way you would have me to see them. Help me to predetermine that I'm going to do hard things. And so, Father, we thank you for really the most beautiful and supernatural thing I think that you do, and that's you bring healing and redemption to our world. And not just the distant parts, and not just the most broken parts that feel disconnected to us, but even in the wounds that we carry. God, I pray that when we look around this room, a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, because of the work that we collectively do, and because of the posture that we take, but more importantly, because of the supernatural power that you do and that you move in and through us, Father. I pray that we would be people who can bring healing and redemption to the world because you've done it in us. And not that you make us soft, and not that you make us not justice focused or accountability focused, not that. But our default posture is the posture that you've given us of love and kindness. And God, that you would cause us to move through the world with a deep hope for the redemption of it. God, we believe that you can. We ask that you would, and we ask that you would do it through us. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.